to welcome you to the final session on the future of payments in South Africa in partnership with the World Bank, the Presidency, and also the SARC. We've also been very fortunate to have support from SACO, the European Union, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well. And obviously from the World Bank, the GTPX program has been specifically helpful in actually putting this program together for this webinar series. So I'd just like to say thank you for those of you that have journeyed with us over the last sort of 8 webinars, this being the last one. And I'm quite excited that it's the last one. We've got a different program for you today. As you can see, we're going to cover a little bit, we're going to do a bit of a background on some data issues, data storage, enablers linked to data, because obviously in the entire value chain and ecosystem, when we start to think about payments and the future of payments, we need to think about how data is shared, how data is stored, and interoperability has come up constantly as a very important theme from all of the presenters from various countries. So today we're going to look at a little bit of that just in the first hour. And then in the second hour of the session, we'll actually start at we'll start at 3 very promptly, because Saul from the presidency, who's actually the custodian and owner of this webinar series, has to actually excuse himself. So he's basically just going to set up the framework discussions really around, you know, the importance of the future of payments for South Africa, where we're going with payments and what kind of processes we'd like to put around this. Something that has been raised quite a few times from various speakers, for example, Fani from SASSA has actually phoned to say, please, can we actually start to coordinate this work? It's so important for us as a SASSA, and we can't let government run in different directions doing their own thing. We do need some coordination. So this is really a call to action, which has been a very important point for us as well. We've obviously journeyed and learned quite a lot over the last sort of like sessions that we've had, but now where to from here? And that's really what the next hour from 3 until 4 is really going to cover. And here we've got a couple of speakers. As I said, Saul will set the framework, but then will excuse himself. Tim, unfortunately, is not available. He's actually ill. We've just discovered it, so he's at the doctor, so he won't be able to present. But we do have Chris Hamilton with us, who is the ex-CEO from BankservAfrica from Hamilton Platform. And Chris is currently working on the digital payment strategy for the SARB. So the SARB is presented in some way. Then we've got Diane Dunkley presenting from SASSA. We've got Karel Karpinski, who you've seen before, who's actually from the World Bank. And then we've obviously got Kumaran, I can't get your surname right, so maybe when you introduce yourself, you can actually do that, from BASA. And then we've also got Jason Wong, who's from the Payments Association. So that's who's on our panel as we really discuss, you know, a way forward. And then we'll put the question and answers at the end. Please, if you have any questions that you'd like to post, please put them in the chat. We do keep a close eye on the chat, and also raise your hand at any point if you would like to ask a question as well. If we can fit in the Q&A before Saul leaves, that would be great. So we will then leave that, but Saul does need to leave fairly promptly at about 3:05. So I'm going to hand over to Eldrid Jordaan, who is at GovChat and is responsible for the onboarding of beneficiaries for SASSA. So he'll be presenting the SASSA use case specifically. Eldrid, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's great to spend time with you this afternoon. Dialing in from the Overstrand in the Western Cape, about, I'd say, 40 kilometers outside of Cape Town. Let me share my screen very, very quickly. Great. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. It's buffering. That's perfect. Thanks, Eldrid. Great.
Brilliant. So just a bit about GovChat and how it started. I'm sure many of you can remember a platform called Mixit. Mixit lasted for about 11 years. Still today, I believe Mixit is the most successful technology that has come out of the African continent from a messaging point of view. This is way before WhatsApp and way before Facebook. About 88 million registered users in 120 countries, doing about 1 billion messages each and every single day. I was a part of that Mixit team looking after government and had 2 very successful mobile applications that I created within the Mixit platform. The one for the presidency and another one for the African National Congress, literally just trying to understand whether there was appetite for young South Africans aged between 18 and 35 to engage with government, and found out very quickly that it wasn't national government issues that they wanted to engage with, but actually local government issues around access to water, access to electricity. And the big question was about job creation. How could government assist them in finding a job? But in 2015, Mixit closed down, and I then decided to use my learnings at Mixit. I will also declare that I am a former public servant. I am the former special advisor to the Minister of Public Enterprises, and so institutions like Eskom, SAA, Transnet, I used to work with, and used my learnings within the state-owned enterprises environment, but also in technology, and decided to create a very simplistic platform which tries to connect citizens with government, which is called GovChat. And today is the official citizen engagement platform for the South African government. This is a co-created model. One of the successes, I believe, for GovChat purely stems from that it is a co-created model with the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Social Development, SALGA, and SASSA, and then just recently signed a partnership agreement with the United Nations in South Africa, ensuring that we leave no one behind, and that we really emphasize and advocate for SDG 17, which is around partnerships. Now, the second big thing that I believe why GovChat was able to create a very successful platform was because we did not create a mobile application. South Africa and the African continent is very different to the West, and we created a platform or technology that integrates into messaging platforms that you already have on your mobile phone, like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. And literally, you could add GovChat as a contact, or a contact, like you would add your husband or wife or just a family member. You would be able to add this, and you can then engage with government at various levels. The first feature that we created with Cocta was with a location pin drop that you could find out who your public representatives were. Back at Mixit, we found out that 80% of South Africans did not know who their public representatives were, and then that was the first issue that we tried to fix. GovChat has also mapped out well over 60,000 government public spaces, police stations, post offices, SASSA offices, schools, healthcare institutions, even IEC voting stations. And we allow citizens to rate and report their experiences at these institutions, both from a public service point of view and then from a public infrastructure point of view as well. It's important that we distinguish between services and infrastructure. And so when citizens say that government is doing well, it's not doing well, that we understand exactly what those issues are. We also integrate and enable citizens to report municipal issues at any one of the 278 municipalities, whether it is a metro municipality or a rural municipality in the Northern Cape, like Kuruman. We enable citizens to report municipal issues. But the two biggest activity, making up about 80% of the traffic on GovChat, is COVID-19 related The first one, in partnership with the Department of Health, the COVID Connect platform, which enables South African citizens to get their COVID-19 test results, whether you have private healthcare through AMPAT or PATCare, or whether you are using the public healthcare sector, whether it's Barra or Grooteskier or Tygerberg Hospital, that you could get your COVID test results on the GovChat platform. And then the most exciting one, obviously, is SASSA. GovChat has digitized the social relief of distress grant application, which I will talk through a bit later. From a user demographics point of view, where do these users come from? About 8.5 million of them, South African citizens, are using GovChat, in a very active manner. We are in about 5.5 million households in South Africa. Big portions coming from Gauteng at 28%, KZN at 26.1%, and the Western Cape at 10.2%. A very nice spread across South Africa. 80%, I'd say, are young people, but to be more specific, 61% between 18 and 34 years old. From a mobile operator point of view, 40% Vodacom users, 39% MTN, and Cell C and Telkom making up 12% and then 9% as well. But I guess one of the most alarming slides or facts within this slide is the type of mobile phones that South Africans use to access GovChat. And we found out thousands upon thousands of South Africans applying for a 350 Rand grant, needing assistance from the South African government, is applying with an iPhone 10. Now, there are many reasons for that, but for me, I think it is a clear indication of South African citizens previously that were middle class, but obviously because of COVID, is in need of assistance from the South African government, and we are still seeing the type of mobile phones that they are using to access, that grant. What do they do on GovChat? And this is just, a really important slide. Just in the last few months, GovChat has processed well over 576 million messages on the GovChat platform. We've received since the 11th of May in 2020, well over 12.9 million applications for the social relief of distress grant. We have also assisted SASSA in digitizing the call center around frequently asked questions. And I think in the first month of helping SASSA in that regard, we were able to answer well over 500,000 questions, saving SASSA about 7.5 million Rand in call center seat costs, showing the power of technology and as an enabler through a pandemic as well. We've also assisted SASSA in bringing a booking system online for those that would want to apply or see a medical practitioner for the temporary disability grant. We've seen over 7 million COVID-19 Connect users using GovChat in partnership with the DOH and Preocult, Telkom as well, BECX, to access their COVID test results. We've seen 14.8 million South Africans try and see what the status of their application is for that 350 Rand grant. And we've seen well over 70,000 government ratings on GovChat. From a gender-based violence point of view, GovChat also enables citizens to find out where the closest safe space is when they are going through gender-based violence reporting, and we've received about 19.8 thousand of these reports. And we've also been able to send the command center for the gender-based violence command center about 4,400 calls we were able to send through to DSD. We've also seen about 8.5 thousand reports coming from school bullying as well. And then when the Department of Social Development implemented the ECD presidential stimulus package for ECD practitioners to register, we were able to assist DSD in registering about 124,000 ECD practitioners through the GovChat platform. From a ratings point of view, I'm very honored to say that we were able to receive well over 70,000 ratings. The top 3 institutions are schools, SASSA offices, and then post offices. Obviously, this is related to COVID-19, and we do ratings out of 5. And with more detail, I can obviously also show you what those ratings say. And we do this not just at a province level, not just at a municipal level, but we actually do this at a ward level. And so we can tell you exactly what the lived experiences are of South African citizens when they visit a SASSA office, when they visit a post office, a home affairs office, even a traffic department. We are able to basically help the South African government understand the difference between services and the infrastructure as well. I guess one of the successes of GovChat is related to the scale. Now, during COVID-19, we needed to adapt really quickly. No one planned for COVID-19, and we were able to use our partner AWS to scale really quickly. And I can tell you now that we were handling traffic around 12,000 messages each and every single minute coming on GovChat during the peak of COVID-19. And if you are going to consider payment platforms, I would recommend adopting a cloud strategy, because we are really able to do this at scale. None of the 12.9 million South Africans that applied for a grant during GovChat needed to stand in a queue. They could use this platform and technology to really do that. Now, obviously, we are sitting with a whole lot of data, but I want to guarantee you today that the data that GovChat processes, we do that in alignment with POPI and with the GDPR as well. And we can also say that the data that we present is anonymized, it is aggregated, and it is stripped from the raw information. And so there's no way that anyone is able to take personal identifiable information. We've obviously had many requests, even from government institutions, to access that information. And we do not provide that information to anyone. The data subject is the owner of his and her data, and we have strict agreements with the South African government departments around sharing of data. This data cannot be sold, and there are strict agreements, as I've said, to protect the data that learnings that we have taken from various case studies prior to GovChat, that we take those learnings seriously. We spend a huge amount of money around penetration tests, vulnerability tests, to ensure that the platform is safe and secure. Now, this does not mean that data breaches in the future cannot take place. It is important, though, that we have policies and processes in place, that when things like this do take place, and they do happen, I see that we have representatives of many banks here, of the SARB here as well, and even they have had issues around data and data leaks as well. It's how we respond to these type of issues. Touch wood, since 2016, GovChat has not had a complaint data breach or negligent act around data. And again, I want to say that we take personal and government data very, very seriously, and we will continue to do that. And then how does this all help government? All this data that we consume, that we process, we facilitate, we visualize in a way. We have found out that a lot of the times that the data is above government officials' heads, and so we've taken it to our responsibility to ensure that the way that we present this data, that it tells a story. And so we were able to create mapping capabilities. We were able to integrate various data sets, population stat data sets, SRD data stats, local government data stats, and combine those to provide issues, dashboards like socioeconomic vulnerability dashboards to show South African government, various departments, oversight institutions, institutions like the UN, institutions like the World Bank, exactly where there are hotspots around those that are unemployed and that need the assistance from the South African government. We have also created our platform to help the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs around the district development model, a focus on gender-based violence and capacity planning as well. And then obviously all these data and analytics come in real time, and we make those reports available through this information management system to the South African government. That's going to be my presentation. Again, a strong focus on co-creation, a strong focus on access, and then a strong focus on scale and data security that has enabled us to see well over 8.5 million South Africans use this platform. And once again, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eldrid, for your presentation. I'm going to hand over to Portia. She's actually from BankservAfrica. Portia, over to you. Marcelia will just give you're not new to us. You've actually presented with us before. So it's really a pleasure to have you here again with us. And it's great that you're actually going to be presenting on a path of inclusion, looking at data specifically. So over to you, Portia. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon to everyone and my fellow BankservAfricans who have joined. I'm humbled to be part of the audience, especially the last webinar of the payment session. My presentation takes a cue from the various speakers that participated in the webinar who looked into the elements that needed to have been addressed. So I'll be addressing things like data governance, data management, data consumption, and I'll not dwell more into security. Eldrid has gone into security. I'll also not look into the role that data plays. Megan will be presenting on that. So I'll basically be looking at data as an enabler to payment inclusion and also how data can help in terms of decision making. What is in my presentation? In my presentation, I'll be looking at data as an essential element as an asset to business. I'll look at the data points. I'll look into how we can change ways in thinking about data, how we can develop strategy, considering that the previous speakers have been talking about inclusion, social inclusion, payment inclusion, and everything. We need to come up with a strategy of how we address that. I'm going to also share a sample of reference data architect. And as I move into the information side, I'm going to look at how data can be translated into information. I'm going to look at the importance of artificial intelligence, especially looking at the SASSA case studies. I'm also going to look at digital identity, which is something we cannot ignore, considering that it's also driven by data and the key outputs that would have been derived from the things that we put in place. Thanks. So the previous speakers all emphasized the importance of data in the payment ecosystem. And they were talking about, I think Kathy spoke about it, interoperability was emphasized, shared platforms was emphasized, shared infrastructure was emphasized. But when we talk all of that, at the heart of it, we cannot ignore that data is the heartbeat of organization. Data is the heartbeat of us having to achieve or address payment inclusion. And that's what I'm going to cover. So what is data? I'm saying data is an essential business asset. It is an asset. If you look at, for example, in the financial regulatory compliance, you look at from the SARB, you look at your BASA, you look into how is it used, your general ledger and sub ledgers, that is where data plays a vital role. You look into your reconciliation, your operational metrics, your performance and your budget. That's data. We talk data. You look at your customer element. In terms of the customer element, you need to always look into how you're doing in terms of service, the billing, the recoveries, the fraud and crime. You've also had Eldrid talking about how they've used data in the various aspects of the municipalities and other aspects of government. That's data. That's the importance of data, and it emphasizes the need of saying it's a business asset. From a transactional perspective, you look at the cost and efficiencies, insights and analytics, trends and analytics, growth, all of that, and all of that stem from data. So when we all look at this, then we now understand the importance of data being an asset to any organization. So what are the pain points that have been experienced within the industry? There's various pain points that have been experienced, be it in government, be it in the private sector. Pain points are basically the same when we're dealing with data. We recognize that, for example, in the government sector, there's no integrated view. That also addresses the payment sector. We don't have integrated view across the various sectors. Data remains in silos. There's limits inside the analytics to basic operational reporting. We have disparate silos resulting in numerous physical derived data stores, diverse information. We also have absence of, my apologies, I think we have absence of data ownership. And you've listened to Fanny, who says from SASSA, who's the custodian of data in government? Who owns the data in government? And we need to talk about ownership. When we talk shared data, when we talk open data, when we talk all of that, we need to also look into who will be the owner of data? How is it going to be governed? We also need to look into the data integrity is another pain point that we're looking at. The data that we're going to be utilizing, the integrity of it needs to be looked into. Data governance cannot be ignored when you're taking data. We cannot ignore data management, that it also needs to be managed, especially now that we're talking all the sectors coming in together and working and sharing data and sharing everything. All of those elements need to be in place. We also need to look at the data skills in the country. We also need to look into what are the data skills that we require within the various sectors, because that's very important, especially if we're going to be sharing data, if we're going to be exchanging data and all of that. We also need to look at the infrastructure. Infrastructure was emphasized in the various presentations to say we need to have common infrastructure, shared infrastructure to enable interoperability. That's another element, and we need to look into availability and completeness. And then I move over to how do we need to then address data? We need to look at data differently. We need to change the way we think about data. And how so? How do we think about data? For example, data, right now, data is seen, what was never emphasized as something that can drive the organization to achieve its full potential. So now we need to look at how do we change the way we look at data? We need to say data must be, I'm saying data must be democratized. So the data architecture should eliminate data silos, providing a complete integrated view of the organization. If we've got to achieve all of the things that have been said throughout these webinars, we need to look at that. The organization must be data illiterate. So we need to create literacy in terms of how data needs to be managed, be it BASA, be it PASA. It's something that needs to be looked at, but there needs to be data literacy. We need to look at security and access in terms of data, especially the data that we'll be using as common data. How do we access the data? What is the security around it? How are we utilizing it? That's something very important. We need to have common vocabularies. When we talk shared data, we need to have the common lingo. We need to have vocabulary that makes sense to everyone, and that also needs to be defined. Who defines it is something that will also be debated as we continue with this journey, with this payment journey. Data should be curated, the modeling part, relationships, cleansing of data, and creating dimension of data and measures. We also need to look at the data flows should be optimized for agility, reduce data movement to reduce costs, increase data freshness, and optimize enterprise agility. And I've also heard Eldrid talk about we need to adopt cloud as one of the key elements that can enable data. But at the same time, we also need to look at the pros and cons of data to say if we've got to put data on the cloud, what is the cost related to that? Is the cost of that, is the cost versus on-premise something that we want to undertake. So there's a lot of elements that we need to look at when we're talking data. We need to look at data giving us real analytics and insights, and these are the essential to any modern organization planning and decision making. Developing the data strategy. So now we look at the entire webinar I was talking about. We need to come together and come up with something. How then do we come about developing a data strategy? We need to come as an industry, as the various sectors, to come and say, what is the strategy that we want to build? But the strategy that we want to build or we want to come up with, it should be, we should align our data strategy efforts with a payment ecosystem strategy. So we need to have a payment ecosystem strategy that we align ourselves into. We need to assess our data management capabilities across the ecosystem. We need to say data is everyone's responsibility, be it the banks, be it government, be it SAR, be it BASA, is the responsibility of all. We need to be realistic in terms of managing the change. We need an achievable project roadmap, because it is simple to talk about us sharing data and everything. But first, we need to understand that a strategy needs to be in place, and we need to have a roadmap that is achievable for us to be able to achieve that. We need to strike a balance between planning and implementation. We also need to look at the data-related metrics we agree with and the KPIs to measure success, so that it becomes a journey that we eventually evolves. Something that we need to set, we need to plan to develop data culture. We need to start also with a strategy, not technology. So prior we even think of the technology that we want to adopt, we need to first come up with a strategy as an industry to say, what is the strategy that we need to adopt as the payment industry for us to be able to get to a point now we are saying this is the technology we'll be utilizing. So that is how we'll go about developing the data strategy. I've shared a sample of the reference architecture. I wouldn't want to go into the details, but I'm saying the reference architecture recognizes the following elements. You have your internal sources, you have your external sources. Your internal sources, that is where you can draw from, such as your finance and general ledger. Our RPP product platform is another internal source, our product silos, all of that. Then we have external sources. Our external sources can be SARB, fraud and risk inputs, PASA, and other bodies like your BASAs. Those are external sources. Your national treasuries, your SASSAs, those are your external sources. And then you look at the data platform. The data platform, I've tried to show a picture of the various data platforms, from your data lakes to your off platforms, to your business management, to modeling and analytics, to finance and regulatory. And then I looked at your data consumption. So if I look at your data, I also look at the various elements of data consumption that we need to look at. My next slide focuses on data as a produced asset. You know, we realize that we need to produce this. Data is produced. It's not something that you can go buy there. We produce it through our interactions. We produce it. So how then do we go? How do we achieve data as a produced asset? We say data moves through the various stages. The stages that data moves are my apologies. I don't know what I'm doing to my presentation now. Okay, there you go. Data moves through typical production stages of raw materials, sub-assembly, and finished products. It attracts cost, value add as it moves through the enterprise. It exists in and present in numerous discrete states, and the quality at source impacts quality throughout, but all states of data ultimately impact downstream processes. And we look at what are those various aspects or the stages that data go through. You have your initiate stage. In the initiate stage, that is where you create, you purchase, or you import. You know, you can purchase your data, you can create your data, or you can import the data from somewhere. And what are the primary types under the initiate stage? The primary types of data that comes under initiate stage are your master data, your transaction data, etc. There's elements of it, those are just examples. Then from the initiate, we move into a stage called transform. In the transform stage, that is where now we look at how do we transpose data, how do we modify data, how do we disseminate it, how do we transact using the data. The primary type that helps us to achieve transformation and enrich data, transaction record, and combined data. Then we move over into the analysis. In the analysis, that is where now we're starting to produce different things. That's where you do your BI, business intelligent analytics, you do your reports, you do your KPI metrics, you do your trend analysis. And what is the input to that? The input to that is your aggregated data, your personalized view, your statistical data, your performance data. So those are the stages that can help us to produce data as an asset. And this just gives an example of the various elements in terms of I'm seeing so many things on my screen, hence I'm getting a bit confused. I'm trying to run around this, but anyway, we identify a few elements such as when you look at your insights and analytics, what are your insights and analytics? You have your customer value analytics, you have your trends and performance. Under anomaly detection, you look at things like your system logs, your fraud detection, your data anomalies. Under optimization, we use it for automation, information-based decisioning. Under data storage and access, you have your structured and unstructured. That is where we talk big data and all those types of data. Then you have your processing. What is under processing? Under processing, you have your batch processing, frequency depending on the business needs. You have your stream processing, providing real-time response capability. And then you have your alerts and notification, how you alert your citizens, how you alert your beneficiaries, how you alert your customers. Everyone does alert. If you look at your SASSA, it alerts its beneficiaries. If you look at the banks, we use alert of beneficiaries. So data cuts across all streams, and all of those are all applicable to the various industries within the streams that we've been addressing. Data governance, what is it when I talk data? What is data governance? Data governance, primarily we talk about, it talks about organizational strategy, compliance, risk, and data strategy. And what is it that we're saying? Under data governance, we focus on the principles and rules governing the data itself, deployed by way of governance framework based on principles and policies that direct behavior in respect of data. And when you look at what is data management, so those are the elements that I want us to consider when we talk data governance, we talk data management. What is data management? Data management basically focuses on the means of processing data in accordance with governance principles and policies, the way we deploy IT governance and IT standards that will be adopted across the group or across the industry. And those are the two things that needs to be decided as we continue with this journey. And then this slide tries to look into what are the elements that are technology-based, what are the elements that are business-based. So as we look at these elements, for example, when we're talking shared platforms, shared infrastructure, what are the elements that will be addressed through technology? The elements that we look at, and this is coming from DMBOK, the elements that are looked at through technology will be the blue ones: your data architecture, your data modeling, your data security, your data integration, your data warehousing, your document and content management, your data storage and operation. And that will help us making a decision in terms of the technology that we want to utilize. It will be addressing that. Then in terms of business, what is the business? So the business will be cutting across, be it my BankservAfrica, be it FNB, be it other banks. The business and element will be data quality management, metadata management, business intelligence and analytics, master and reference data. Master and reference data can reside in both spaces, and hence you see it being neutralized by the both colors. So those are things that we look at. What this diagram has not taken into consideration is an element of data ethics, a story for another day that we'll look into to say what is data ethics within the payment industry, and how then do we address data ethics. And it's an element that is missing from this diagram. And then I've also tried to give an example of data architecture to say the data architecture, what is the data architecture? The data architecture is data should be valuable, it should be fit for purpose, it should be democratized, it should be governed, it should be managed, it must be accessible, there must be data literacy. Data literacy is very, very critical, and as it helps us to derive decisions. I will not go into each statement and the rationale around it as to why we need to be adopting that, but it's something that we need to look at when we come up with a data strategy as the payment industry. Approach to open data. Firstly, when you look at the approach to open data, you look into the data structures, the willingness to make the data standard across all systems. So we need to standardize data when we're going to be talking this. We're going to be standardizing data. We need to be willing to share data. We also need to be looking into the trust that we put within the systems and ensuring that we trust whatever the data that is coming is data that has been curated. As you've seen my various slides to say, how do we manage the data? When we talk open data, it is addressed by all of the slides that have been at the top. So that's something that we also need to look into when we do that. I'm not going to go into the security. Yes.
Thanks. You've got about 5 minutes. Thank you.
I've got it. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to go into the security and all of that. The reason being Eldrid has gone into it. So I'll move in terms of what is information, but the reason I want to move into information, I'll move into artificial intelligence to say, if we've got to adopt data as a financial sector, we need to look into How will data help us? It will help us to address things like artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence. And how is that going to help us? It will help us, for example, to be able, especially in the SASSA sphere, to look into algorithms that will be able to identify beneficiaries, algorithms that will be able to tell who's the beneficiary for this, how we can do it. Digital identity will also help us in terms of addressing inclusion, enablement, and it's something that will help us. That's how we consume data. That's how we'll get out of data. It will also help us in terms of increasing the volumes, increasing transaction complexity, and all of that. I'm just rushing now because I have, but what is the importance of data coming through, especially in the SASSA space? It will help in terms of prevention of identity theft. It will help in terms of biometric authentication. It will help to reduce financial fraud through detection and sensitive data protection. It will assist in terms of self-onboarding, the beneficiaries, mobile and deep reach and secure safekeeping. So what are the key takeouts? This is my last slide, Kathy. The key takeouts from my presentation is accelerating data access and integration are crucial in the race to unlock investment success. We need to find a system to bring data together to group level has been proven to be complicated. Another one is heightened investment that regulatory changes are calling for a holistic view of enterprise data management. Also, we need to also accelerate data access and integration as is crucial to us to unlock financial inclusion. On that note, Kathy, I want to thank the audience. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Portia, for that. I really appreciate it. There is a comment. Maybe Suleiman, do you want to raise your comment? Which is around sort of using distributed ledger technologies. And then I'm going to ask, sorry, Megan, just to get ready. Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. Just quickly, I think the idea of both Eldrid's presentation and Portia both alluded to the fact that like we have universal service and universal access, data access is also key, and it needs to be accessible and achievable to everyone. Without compromising data, and the mentality of trying to bring big data into a central source is out. So blockchain and DLT specifically allows that, and also grants the the pseudonymous nature of the data and anonymous data of the data, but also with tight levels of security. So in any payment mechanism going forward, especially with South Africa with its fraud and corruption and graft, which is so endemic, these will have to be key as part of it. Thanks, Kathy.
Super, great comment actually on the use of distributed ledger technologies. Megan, over to you to talk about some of the catalysts of modernization of payments and the work that BankServ has been doing. You can just introduce yourself briefly as well and what you've been doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. So I'm here today as a subject matter expert on payments. I head up strategic payments at First Rand Bank, and I've also recently done some work for the Banking Association to coordinate a piece of work around payments modernization for the sector. So mostly I'll be sharing the insights I've gained from that piece of work and especially the overlaps into what I understand that we're looking to solve for here today. So let me just try to get my next slide up. Sorry.
Megan, just click on your screen and then click the next arrow.
Okay, I think it's hidden. Okay, thanks. So when we looked at essentially modernization of payments, we recognized that a lot of countries around the world had a very intentional program of payment system modernization linked to a broader digital economy strategy. So the countries that resonated for us were the ones that were very specific about looking at the capabilities you needed at a full economy level to drive digitization. So it examined digitization of government, of business, and of citizens, and looked at the enabling factors. So we thought that was relevant in our context where digital payments is both an enabling pillar of broader digitization of the South African economy, but also has reliance on the level of digitization and the enabling factors that exist. So we have a dependency on, say, networks and the cost of data, on whether individuals have the hardware and software to interact digitally So the example of whether you've got feature phones versus smartphones is important, because otherwise you can't offer certain technologies as part of your solution. Data standards is critical. So having a national data policy that incorporates governance and standards is hugely helpful in terms of how you connect up different industries, including banking and payments industries, into this a digital strategy. And then other elements like cloud and digital education skills, so what we call supply side and demand side skills available in our market to accelerate these programs. Digital identity, and what I've called here know your citizen, which is sort of, I think, part of what we're trying to solve for here, as well as digital payments. So we also looked at the fact that payments flow between different sectors. So there's flows of funds between government, business, and citizens constantly, and you can't just solve for one piece in isolation. So again, you're looking at those capabilities that exist and taking a holistic approach to the capabilities you want to put down in your economy to support a digital payment strategy. And that's not to say that our focus is on digitization of payments. It's more around efficiency. So we want to make sure that we're providing appropriate payment systems to the entire economy, and that may also include payments and cash payments as well. Cash is here to stay. So we're looking at optimizing the different forms of payment, but making sure they're efficient and they fit for purpose. So I put the picture in there about the first, the middle, and the last mile. So historically, in payment systems and as collaborative partners that come together to develop payment systems, we've focused on what we call the middle mile, the interoperable components between stores of value. But we stepped away and said we've got to look at the end-to-end value chain, the first and the last miles as well, if we really truly want to solve for making sure our payment systems are fit for purpose. So that gives us an opportunity to say, what is government looking to solve for? What does their first and last mile look like? What do individuals need solved for? What does their first and last mile look like? So that the middle mile that we build is cognizant of those components. So that's a good reflection point to say, in terms of the work that we're currently doing, how does that relate back then to this piece of work around sort of modernizing payments as they relate to government and their payments in and out, and the capabilities that you're exploring and how that supports a sort of modernization of payments. So I'm thinking of it in terms of how the slide articulates it, that we're sort of looking at how do we mobilize data, and Portia used the term democratize, which resonates well, to saying mobilize that data to support planning, analysis, and execution of planned and unplanned state funds deployment. So I've picked on those points because a lot of the discussions around the pandemic and how we've experienced the need to urgently deploy funds into vulnerable parts of society or parts of society impacted by certain events. And that's sort of shown where we've needed these capabilities on an urgency basis, but also can use them in kind of our business as usual conditions where we just want to create more efficiencies, more new capabilities in terms of how we deploy service provision. That then connects into how you then execute those payments. So there's a piece then for how government, like any business or corporate, has to have payments capabilities to then execute on the payments that they've identified that they want to deploy. And there's architecture required within the state and across its different agencies to execute payments, and then into the interoperable systems, and then into how it lands with the recipients. And then lastly, how those receipt of funds can be deployed by those individuals. So simplistically, how do we create choice and optionality and suitability of the way in which recipients, be they individuals or businesses, receive the funds into different stores of value in a place that's convenient and suitable for them, and they're able to use those funds in a convenient manner for their various payments needs. So that's kind of the end-to-end supply chain. I'll speak a little bit about each of those components. So I wanted to just touch here a little bit about some data and data use cases. So Portia's given us a really nice framework in terms of exactly these components. And I thought just to bring it to life, to give you some examples in terms of how we understand the use of data. So from those sources of data to how we use them in use case examples, and how they're used for, but also when you merge data sources together and then you create insights, and they become quite powerful things. So it's just food for thought in terms of how we're currently using it, especially in the banking sector. So I've given some examples of our own data. So things like geolocation. So when we're able to geolocate your position from, because you put a card in a POS machine or used an ATM or you logged into something and you've given us permission to log your geolocation, that gives us a piece of information, especially to be used in terms of fraud. So if you're suddenly logging on in China and we don't think you're there, it's a risk metric for us to say, wait, could this be a fraudulent transaction, and we must contact our customer. Similarly, IP address is quite a powerful thing. If we've seen you log in through an IP address many times before, it's a low risk transaction. If it's a new IP address, we would be alerted. It's another risk factor to say this is an unusual transaction. Obviously, we've got lots of profile information that you submit to us, mostly in terms of your KYC requirements, but also in terms of obligations to FICA. So if you say you're employed by somewhere, that gives us information on your source of income. Then if we monitor your income transactional activity and it's misaligned, then we say, okay, something's a risk alert for us to say something might be fishy here. We've got obligations in terms of FICA to investigate. Similarly, monitoring your product holdings, how sophisticated are they? What kind of activity are you doing? Now, all of this is done obviously at a data level. We've got systems to do this for us. You could never do it on a manual basis. So the extent to which you integrate all of these different sources of data helps us to meet our obligations, to check if the information we have about you is consistent with the way that we see you handling your business, the flows of funds through your products, to then alert us to whether there's more work to be done in terms of our obligations to check that there's no fraud, there's no money laundering, etc. And then things like life stages and preferences, those are more softer data elements that say, how can we service you better, offer you the right products that are more suitable for you, and make sure that you have a good experience with the bank in terms of your interactions. Then in terms of source data, I've given you a whole lot of examples of different types of data which we source from sort of private sector firms to many of them, and most of them are to support us in risk management. So, how do we assess your credit status and your ability to repay credit? How do we look at, again, LexisNexis, for example, in the example there gives you metrics around emails that might have been associated with fraud before, IP addresses associated with fraud. TransUnion's got a tool that gives you mobile numbers that have been associated with fraud or SIM swaps, etc., just to raise the risk profile or risk alerts on those numbers. SAFPS will give you information about identities that have been stolen, logged as stolen, that you can then also raise a risk around. So those are all examples of different sources of data. Some of them are in more raw format, some of them are enhanced analysis and analytical formats. So like Lightstone will source its data from the deeds office, but they will process the data to give us information on valuations, for example. So if I want to buy a home, Lightstone can tell you what the other homes on your block have gone for, to give you a sense of what the valuation should look like. So that's a form of kind of enhanced and processed data to give you more information to help you make certain assessments around decisions that you might take as a business. And then in terms of the public sector, just to sort of alert you to the fact that we obviously also consume certain data that sits in the public sector. So banks are privileged to have access to Department of Home Affairs. It's hugely useful to assist us in achieving our KYC obligations, so to confirm the identity of people. But there are other sources of data that are important for us to do a validation of data submitted to us, to cross-reference data, to risk assess data, and to confirm ownership of things like vehicles, or even to give you value-adding tools like letting you know when your vehicle license is due for renewal, if that's a service that we might want to offer you. So those are examples of certain public sector data that we source. Most of those we don't get directly from the state. We get through these third party, like the ones that provide us in the middle column, kind of data aggregators like TransUnion, etc. The credit bureaus are typically entities that source government data, process it, and then make it easily accessible to us and other private sector firms for consumption based on lots of different use cases. So like attorneys or estate agents would similarly be processing this type of data through a kind of easy front end model, even where the data may be either private or public sector.
And then I'm going to give you 3 minutes just because Saul needs to leave, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Thanks.
So this picture just gives you examples. I'm trying to be generic now around the different applications of how you use this data. So I won't go into deep detail around it, but it's just a suggestion on the way that you consume that data and what you use it for. This slide's described what I've sort of said already. It's these different sources of data, the way it comes through these kind of entities that are data aggregators and then allow us to consume it in a fairly seamless fashion, typically through APIs to then meet our business requirements. This slide really just is a touch base with where we are on the BASA Payments Modernisation journey. So if you look at the blue blocks in particular, you'll see quite a lot of potential overlaps with what we're looking to solve for and what this webinar series and this effort is also looking to solve for. But really how we ensure that our modernization and our future investments into payment systems are solving for exactly these requirements from our different sectors of the economy, using the latest technology and embracing certainly data as a theme, and using data to enhance the capabilities around data and not just the pure flow of funds. And then, you can read this at your leisure when you access this off the website, but I think we just reflected on a nice piece of work from the World Bank and Finmark Trust on a needs analysis for grant recipients. We've done a gap analysis against what we've got today and what we'll get after the RPP investment goes live. And I think maybe just to articulate a couple of key points. So this is that last part of that picture in terms of when recipients receive their funds and the way in which they use them to make payments and to not revert it into cash in the ideal, that these are some of the takeaways that we think are important to solve for. So it's the device, whether you have it, it's consistency of experience that people can show each other how to use it. It's the trust in the system, trusting that the value of funds I've got is what I've got. There's no unexpected deductions, etc. The importance of managing the migration between cash and card and a fully digital payment system is important. And I think interoperability. So as we're getting more and more kind of wallets and stores of value, the ability to interoperate and not have to be forced to almost have like 5 different wallets for 5 different use cases. So this drive around interoperability that the SARB and National Treasury are keen to pursue will become very important in that space. And then just finally, I think the fact that digitization is a national theme, it's a national imperative for us to remain globally competitive. It does require coordinated effort that we do work together because of the importance of governance and standards around digitization, and especially the exchange of data and the role of data in digitization. Working together to create those supporting pillars. And then I think very specifically for us in the payment system, this overlap on these topics where I can say that we're very grateful for this opportunity to engage with government to understand their needs and to play our part where appropriate in providing the right capabilities to support you in your journey in the achievement of a modernized payment system. I'll stop there, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Megan, and for actually being on time. I really appreciate that. And I think sort of a few clear overlaps. I mean, if people can take note of that, and the presentations will actually be shared as well. So we're going to move over to the next session. I haven't forgotten you, Suleiman, so we can come to some of your comments at the end if that's okay. I just want to make sure that Saul can leave. So if Saul can actually just sort of set the tone and the frame of where to from here. We've been on quite an exciting journey. We've had 8 sessions since September, and we're ending on the 15th of December. And Chris, we've had up to 70 people, so I think we've done pretty well. So thank you for your commitment. Over to you, Saul, just to set the frame, and then I'll excuse you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And again, I think perhaps just to start by thanking everyone who's here, including and especially those who've attended this whole series. I think setting out to host an eight-part webinar series is an ambitious and foolhardy undertaking. But I think that the kind of response we've received to this series has been, I think, a demonstration of how vitally important this issue is, because the response has been amazing. I think every webinar has been very well attended, including this one on the 15th of December. So to just thank everyone for sticking through it with us, and for being here and participating, for sharing your ideas and insights throughout. And then also from us in the presidency, to thank the team behind this webinar series. I would have given these thanks at the end, but I'll have to leave in a few minutes. So to just get it out the way now and say to Kathy and Carla from CBPEP, to Julian and Claudia and Shireen from the World Bank, who've supported this series, and many others who've supported along the way. I think it's been a really constructive and rich and engaging series. So thank you again. The second half of this webinar is really an opportunity for reflection at the end of the series. And perhaps to go back to where this webinar series came from. Over the past 2 years, we've had a lot of experience with the need for a modernized payment system in South Africa, and indeed around the world. It began with our early work on the Social Relief of Distress grant, the 350 Rand grant, which had to be conceptualized and implemented under significant constraints at the onset of the pandemic, and had to reach millions of people in a very short space of time who were not currently in the social protection system. In addition to that, we had the COVID-19 TERS payments by the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which faced similar challenges of having to scale up, manyfold the number of payments and the complexity of managing disbursements in rolling out relief. We've also had a range of programs in the presidential employment stimulus, a very rapid expansion of public employment, needing to onboard participants and to pay them in a timely and efficient way. And all of these experiences, I think, showed up really the weaknesses in our current system in South Africa, and also the very urgent need to modernize the payment system, but in a way that would enable us in future to respond more flexibly and immediately to future crises, and not just in crisis response, but also generally in seizing the opportunities that new technologies present and new ways of working present. And I think that's where we came from in setting up this series. So with that in mind, I think we've covered a lot of ground in the last 8 sessions. I won't attempt to summarize because there's been so much information, but we've covered the full range from how you identify people, digital identity, through to the full value chain of payments, disbursements, reconciliation, and at every step of that way, the kinds of innovations that exist, that have been implemented in other parts of the world and that could be replicated or innovated here in South Africa, the kind of shared infrastructure and interoperability that we need to develop in a current landscape that's fragmented with a huge amount of duplication and unnecessary complexity. And I think that the case studies that we've learned from other countries' experiences, whether Indonesia or Turkey or Bangladesh, or a lot of the stories that we've heard of countries that have undertaken a similar modernization effort have been incredibly informative. And where it leaves us, I think, is having developed a really useful knowledge base in the course of this series through all of that. But also having brought together a lot of people from within government, from multiple different departments and from beyond government, into one room virtually to really unpack the issues, to learn more about the various directions that this agenda could take, and to really create a platform for action going forward. And that I think was our objective in this journey. So lastly, I think to set the scene for the rest of the session, the question that we really want to pose is where to from here? Having learned all of this, having gathered all of this information, we have the opportunity to use COVID and the experience of the last 2 years to drive transformation in the payment system in South Africa. And we really want to ask the panelists, I think, what the key insights are that they've heard from this series that we should focus on and drawing out and taking with us going forward. Secondly, what the key challenges and gaps are in our current landscape and what we need to solve for in South Africa. And lastly, what the priorities are that we need to focus on and the opportunities are that exist for us to harness in our context. One of the things that I think has come through very strongly, at least in my perspective, has been the way that the need for central coordination. And I think in every case study that we heard, this came through. But given the number and diversity of players involved in this ecosystem, the need for really strong central coordination, but also collaboration within government and between government and the private sector. And we'll be really looking and hoping to take a lot of this work forward to play a useful and enabling coordinating role where we can. And I hope that the rest of the session will be able to try and bring together a lot of this information and start to outline what that agenda looks like and what the next steps are. So with that, I'm very sorry that I won't actually be present for the rest of this panel, but I will watch the recording. And I hope that the next 50 minutes will give us a blueprint for the next couple of years in how we take all of this work forward. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for participating, and thanks for the panelists who'll be sharing their thoughts now.
Thanks, Saul. I don't know about a blueprint, but certainly we might have some ideas as to where we need to go. So I'd like to invite our panelists, if I can ask you to actually turn on your cameras as you join us. We've got Karel Karpinski, as I said, who's actually from the bank. We've got Chris Hamilton, we've got Diane Dunkley and Fani Satoka from SASSA. Kumaran, I'm going to try your surname, Selvarajula. I might not get that right, but you can correct me by all means. From BASA, we've got Jason Wang. So thank you very much for joining us. I know many of you have actually been quite loyal subjects in this process and have actually participated and attended many of the sessions and very seldom missed any of them. So I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you for your participation in this process. As we go through some of the CVs like online, as I quickly chat, Saul has given us quite a nice frame, like where to from here. I mean, I think, Chris, you've always asked that question, and I think a lot of us are asking the same question, where to from here? So I'm going to start off by opening up to Karel to actually give us some key insights on just your general experience, around payments in the global landscape and the role of central coordination and what some of the key challenges and gaps are, sort of at a high level, and then I'll hand over to sort of our other respondents as well. Karel, over to you. I can't hear you, Karel. It might be a separate device.
All right, let's
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. My apologies. Let me just make sure I can also hear you. All right, should be all right. Thank you very much to you and all the panelists. That was a very fascinating session. I tried to gather some of our ideas together, also based on what others, including Saul, have contributed. So I think that it's an interesting place that South Africa is with respect to payments and payment systems, because it's a place where lots of middle and some high income countries are. And this is the place where fast initial growth in the financial sector has been a blessing, but also a curse. So for instance, as what you referred to before, the research by the World Bank and Finmark showing some of the deficiencies and gaps and with respect to recipients of the government-to-person payments have shown is that it was a big problem with the visibility of live balance on their accounts, and that's sort of directly connected to the fact that South Africa has a very extensive network of cards issuance and acceptance, and of course payment cards are not eligible, are not capable of displaying live balance the way mobile money or other mobile apps are. So one of those examples where really you are in the you almost pay the price of your earlier success, because some of the other players have leapfrogged the system with new ideas and new products. But I think that one of the crucial parts that we're talking about here is what really Portia alluded to, and this is data, the role of data and data governance. At the heart of it, really, payments is, I would say, about two things. One is risk management, and another is data exchange. So you could say that data exchange is really 50% of any payment success. And in that respect, I think that it will be very important that we start bringing together the way this sequence of events has the industry and the government. The government should not only be one of the many users of payment services, although of course it is, but it should also be perceived as the gateway for many South Africans, many citizens to enter the financial systems, and therefore should have that seat at the table when the industry discusses data governance. I mean, to have an idea, just a very random issue, right? The different payment systems in South Africa are in the process or either already having implemented or about to implement ISO 20022 or other messaging standards. And it would be really important to have government and the public sector visible in those debates to see how the industry standardization efforts can actually benefit government as a payer and a payee too. So I think that in a sense, the South African structure with payment clearing operators and associations with the BASA at the apex lends itself well to stakeholder coordination across different parts of both public and private sector. So just probably a matter of expanding the range of stakeholders by, for instance, the Philippines or indeed India did. Another issue that has been talked about briefly, but I think it's becoming a bit of a elephant in the room, is really to delineate well the limits of cooperation and competition, and where cooperative endeavors are to take place, and where we are actually relying on free competition between providers. And this is something that a lot of different countries have been struggling with, coming with very different sort of equilibrium points. To give an idea, for instance, just the other day, the banking sector in the United Kingdom has agreed on a plan to co-locate bank branches so that they can actually reach out financially excluded consumers that are far away and need in-person because they're not quite capable of onboarding themselves using mobile or online apps. So this equilibrium between competition and cooperation, and therefore the sort of delineation of the role of public sector and subsidies is, I think, one of the crucial points that the South African stakeholders will have to discuss and address and agree upon a blueprint and implement it. But I'm very confident after hearing all the presentations that you're on the right track to get it done. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Carl. So maybe Dai, I mean, you've been in quite a few of these sessions, and Fani can come in. Sort of what are some of the big takeaways for you in terms of what you've learned, and sort of what some of the big challenges are that have been important?
Thanks so much, Kathy. I think for us, the big takeaways, the big lessons that we've learned, firstly, is this incredible need for the centralization and availability of accurate data. I think that has been the biggest pain point that we've experienced, and it's the one that we really do need to address. Also, as we look at that it's not just data within the government environs that we need to look at, but also what is available in the private sector. You know, we focus so much on what we've been able to validate using government sources, but what about the others that we are missing? So that the whole single view of the citizen that is coordinated centrally, I think, is absolutely critical. And then I think the other really big lesson that we've learned is that, particularly for small value payments, the traditional methods of payments are not the best. They're convenient, we know about them, they're comfortable for us, but whether they work for the clients that we serve is a different question. So the absolute pressing urgency to get alternatives that are cost effective, that are easy to use, that are easy to understand, that are available universally, and certainly that are less costly, I think for us is absolutely critical. And I think those were some of the really exciting things that we learned. And yes, that goes hand in hand with your digital identity, which is absolutely critical so that you can manage risk in the environment, particularly where you're moving, you know, dealing with really large numbers of people and moving large amounts of money, even though each transaction is a small value transaction. And I think for us, those were the really critical lessons that we've learned that has been hugely valuable through this session. Thanks, Kathy.
Fani, to you, almost following on from Dai, what are some of the priorities going forward in this space for you? So, I mean, Dai's talked about a few, but for you in the operations space at SASSA.
Yeah, I think, and good afternoon to everyone in the session. Kathy, for me, I would want to take it exactly where Sol left it, just to indicate that the journey that has been traveled through until now, indeed, it was an eye-opener, because as SASSA, and I'm talking from an angle that you will recall all these years, we've been paying grants into accounts. And through these sessions and through what happened last year, we woke up out of the blue with a sudden need to be able to pay social grants using alternative payment channels, as long as they were contactless. So that already, what it implies is that as a matter of urgency for me, where I'm seated, I would want a situation where the issues of data governance can be discussed, and so that they can be done and dusted with soon. But secondly, the part that Diane and a few other colleagues have outlined, and you know, Kathy, I've once came back to you after listening to 2 or 3 other countries that did these presentations, and I said, what will be of immediate impact to us as SASSA if we are to be going into digital payments is the issue of digital identity. Remember, amongst benefits that we're paying benefits to clients that are affected in disasters. And some of those clients, you'd find they don't have any documentation. Now, during disasters, many things happen in our space. People are repeating, they're coming back, repeating themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, the issue of digital identity and related regulatory framework becomes a priority which we as the South African government needs to start looking at as a matter of urgency. But Kathy, the role to be played by National Treasury is quite critical, because I would want a situation where when this discussion start unfolding, it will be a big mistake if a team is going to be established and Treasury is not part of this particular team, only to find that when organizations similar to us, because where we are as SASSA today, we are on the verge. Digital payments is one of the highways that we want to be taking, and very soon. But what is going to be a problem is if the role to be played by Treasury is not going to be clarified, and Treasury are not going to form part of this discussion, this framework, these engagements, we are likely going to see this bus stopping and actually looking back where it's not supposed to be looking at. The last element from me is government having to confirm the appetite, whether there is appetite for the Department of Home Affairs to have a role on the issue of digital identity. Because if the Department of Home Affairs is not going to have a role, what then becomes an urgent priority is that what digital identification landscape do we want to see being put in place in the country? And I think if I was to take a sample of what was presented by the Indian government, if I remember well, they were actually saying that they have 4 or 5 agencies that are allowed in that particular country to collect digital identity data for the citizens. Meaning, if you have to go and verify a client, you then have to be using you need to be having access to these 4 or 5 agencies. But what is that picture which the South African government want to see unfolding eventually? And of course, lastly, to just say that besides SASSA being one of the critical payment agencies on behalf of government, in the context of government to people payments, it is a fact that we would want to be amongst the few within the government space to start utilizing digital payments if South Africa is going to be going through that particular role. Of course, taking into account that 30 million of the South African population are actually a clientele of SASSA or are on SASSA's database. So if South Africa has to make a change, has to make a difference, SASSA would want to be amongst the key role players that are considered in this space. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fani, for those very useful insights. Chris, I'm going to hand over to you to talk to 2 things. One is, what do you think some of the priorities are? But more importantly, from where you're sitting and the work that you're doing, what the role of the SARB is in sort of the future of payments specifically, and in this process, I suppose, going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Let me start by saying very clearly that anything I say should not be taken as something that SARB says. I'm absolutely not speaking for SARB.
Are we asking you to say what they should do?
Just in case there was any doubt about that, I'm one voice of many who are advising SARB, and they will express their own views in their own time, of course. Nevertheless, happy to speak as a sort of subject matter expert in the area. Look, this has been the speakers have all said this has been a fantastic exercise, a real treasure trove. It makes me a bit worried in a way, because there's so much rich detail about particular problems and operational issues and opportunities that we're going to get lost in it, right? But there's too much, if you like, and we need to treat it like an encyclopedia. We shouldn't be reading it cover to cover. We should be dipping into it when we need to solve particular problems, right? So I want to try and step back from all of that and not try and talk through many of the fascinating issues we talked about, and really think about it from that Saul's question, what do we do next? And just to try and keep it simple, in my head, there's a sort of a recipe that has 3 C's in it, which is clarity, commitment, and coordination, right? And I'm going to talk with that agenda, right? So the clarity thing is that there are a lot of different parties around the table, even just within government. There's a lot of different parties around the table. And there are a lot of different agendas, and that's completely understandable. We could just about, in this area of government to person payments, we could just about lay all those agendas on one continuum from, all of them are good. I'm not saying any of these are bad agendas, right? There's at the one end, there's a very practical thing about reducing waste, increasing efficiency, reducing fraud, just more of the money getting to the people, which is a powerful, important, and difficult thing to achieve. And we had good examples of countries saying that's what we're doing and that's what we're going to do, right? We could do that, but that's actually at the bottom end of this spectrum of possibility, because at the top end of the spectrum is stuff like bring every person into the digital economy by 2025, or a big goal like that. Don't quote me on the numbers, but you can set yourself some really challenging macroeconomic targets. And we know, and the World Bank's been telling us, that a really good strategic implementation in your digital payments infrastructure is going to assist you to reach those challenging targets. It's not just about reducing waste and increasing efficiency. It's about the big ticket. And it's not just financial inclusion. It is the role of women was a point that I thought was really interestingly made by the World Bank. It is the increasing of economic growth through entrepreneurship. That's a classic policy goal of South Africa. This country has an enormously entrepreneurial spirit, and how do we harness that to get the right sort of outcomes? These are really exciting ideas, but they're also hard to bring back into the practicalities of what do we do about the payment system, which is why so many countries tend to default back to something at the lower end of that spectrum of agendas, But we need clarity. One way or the other, someone in authority needs to say, look, all of that stuff is great, but what we're doing is this. Or we're doing this for the next 2 years, and then after that, we're doing this. The countries that we heard from that were very successful are the ones that had that kind of a big ticket plan. They said, first, we're going to fix this bit. Think India, right? First, we're going to do Aadhaar. Then we're going to actually roll out 2 or 3 specific payment systems, and then we're going to drive people to digitize. Now, they made mistakes in their cycle. I think we can all agree with that. There is some stuff that went wrong, but the clarity of that vision is the powerful thing, and we need that. We need that clarity here. And it's not easy because there is a whole spectrum of possible agendas you could adopt. That's clarity. Commitment is all about who's actually on board for this and how is that visible to everyone else. One of the things, forgive me, but I don't think the South African government does well, is articulating a whole of government commitment that is clearly shared by Treasury, by SASSA, by the central bank, which is critical in this space, by SARS, because they've all got their own specifically allocated and important public responsibilities. But in this space, they're all going to have a role to play, and we're not going to get there if they don't all sign up to the clarity I was talking about. So whatever that clarity ends up being, what we need is a whole of government commitment to that clarity, which is specific, which says, SARB has on its agenda delivering that outcome that the government to payments people decided on, and SARS has that, and SASSA has that, and Treasury has that. And then once you get beyond that, actually the real power here is the private sector, because you will achieve a great deal more if you harness the private sector to that clarity of commitment. And my judgment, having worked in the banking community for a while, and Megan's the expert here today, she'll be able to comment, but if you can deliver a whole of government clarity to the private sector, they'll be on board if they can see why it's a public sector public policy necessity for South Africa. The South African banking community and other communities go out of their way to try and support those government commitments when they see them being made. So there is a big opportunity there. That would be great, And then my last C is not centralization, but coordination. Right? Centralization is dangerous because it means you end up trying to boil the ocean. I know it's attractive because if you could get all the data in one place, then you could solve so many problems. The trouble is you never will get all the data in one place, and you'll never get it in a way where it's usable by everybody. We have to actually coordinate, not centralize. We have to say there are these different pools of data, but they are properly coordinated in some meaningful way, and specific responsibility for maintaining the quality of the data is allocated to a range of different people and not one huge monstrous organization, right? the maintaining of data quality is actually the hardest part in every database. It's not getting the stuff on and taking it off. It's keeping it consistent and true, right? Quality of data is a massive challenge, and someone has to be given specific responsibility for every pool of data for that purpose. So I'm a big fan of coordinating those things and automating the connections between them rather than, you know, a big focus on centralization. And if we get the clarity and the commitment, we can then coordinate across the community about who has to actually do what, way beyond the scope of today to talk about how all that would be done. But suffice to say, I'm confident it can be done if we can get the first two. I'll probably stop there. Thanks very much.
That's very, very useful insights, Chris. Thank you, and always very succinct. Jason, your views from BASA, you know, where to next from here? And the role of BASA in all the space. I mean, you heard from Carl that, I mean, BASA does sit at the apex of this. So just some of your reflections.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the panelists as well. It's a privilege to be here to share some of my thoughts. Yeah, so I think reflecting on this whole series, I have to say that the starting point for me is that a lot of the case studies that have shown tells me there isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think a lot of those countries have really developed solutions that are based on the challenges within their own jurisdictions and their own economies. So, and I think South Africa is also is following that journey, and we need to consider what are sort of the challenges. And I think Sol mentioned some of those challenges that we are facing, and we know those challenges, and we need to address those challenges and what we are looking at. But I think across all these examples, I think there are some commonalities in the principles in how the countries are actually approaching these. So, and Chris mentioned that earlier, I think the first part, I think that aspiration that is defined by some of these principles and those common themes that we are seeing across all these jurisdictions will help us define the strategy cascade of how, like, where should we be playing, how should we be playing, so what management capabilities are required, sort of the roadmap that that needs to be of the sort of G2P, but not also G2P, but P2G, a public service sort of digital ecosystem. And I think where it really would help is a combination both from a top down, so that it provides those guiding principles, but then a bottom up approach combination that will create the network effects. And I mean, some of the principles that have been included is that although we're talking about digital inclusion, we should be cognizant that, you know, not everyone owns a smartphone, not everyone has access to infrastructure or data. We need to be cognizant of the collaboration, the trust framework, but also awareness, interoperability, the practical side of things, which is really also to drive investments and innovation, really get participation from both the public and the private. Yeah, so those are just, I guess, some of the principles. I'm not going to list them. I think those were just some of the common themes for me. So BASA, as the PSMB, recognized by the MPS Act, I think we're in support of the MPS vision and the goals, and to support some of the goals, and to name a few, like interoperability, financial inclusion, and financial stability. So I think that is part of the culture and the nature of where BASA and collaboration is where we are gearing to. And I think from a BASA perspective, our purpose really is to make sure and promote the efficient flow and movement, or the circulation of funds within the economy, to really look at help South Africa develop a world-class payments, and also help manage and develop the payments, the MPS in South Africa. Obviously, those are where we, our mission, our purpose. But I think what has also come out is that we need, although we can create the infrastructure, the technical side, but there are different layers to interoperability. And we need that coordination and that collaboration, as well as the legal certainty in order to make sure that is sustainable. Yeah. And I think the last part for me, going forward, and for us as a community, I think that this community already has been a big value in coordinating discussion and sharing information. But I think there's also lots of discussions happening elsewhere. And I think it's important for us to share information and to share discussions, because we do not want to be missing each other in this journey as well. Thank you. Yeah, no, just so much.
Very positive, thanks. Very positive statement to end on. Kamaran, I'm going to pull up your slides and you can just sort of talk to them if you just give me a seckie.
While you're doing that, Kathy, I'll give you the pronunciation. It's Salvarajlu.
Ah, thank you.
It took me a long time to get that myself as a child. Okay, so I mean, it's just the third slide, and it's simply a summary of what I'll be saying now. While you're doing that, I mean, the big thing to say to this is thank you, right? Thank you to the presidency, the National Treasury, to the community, the information providers, to everyone. This is, I've been in payments 20 years. This is, and it can't be described in any other way. And I'll use lots of absolute terms while I'm talking. It can't be described in any other way as a transformative time for South Africa. Right? That is clearly what it is. Right? It is going to necessitate that the public sector and the private sector look at their working methods and start moving forward to do what is best for South Africa. We've made mistakes in the past. We must understand that. There's lots of opportunities out there. There's lots that we need to get right. And we're in a very difficult place as a country economically. So it is, and this is a particularly unique opportunity to address both the public and private sector participants in payments. We don't have these often, and we should have them much more often. I will say something about payments and the need in SA, but just to couch that in this thinking that this is all about transformation. This is not a simple, let's continue with the algorithms of the past, and they will serve us well in the future. I'm well aware that I'm one of the people standing in front of a lot of the participants' well-deserved leave, so I'll keep it as brief as I can. So where to from here? I mean, Saul summed it up very, very nicely. That's the question, where to from here, right? Is it an information exercise? And have we created the encyclopedia and then relegated it to history? Or do we actually now start lighting fires and start saying, okay, we need to come together. Right? Analysis is good, but we do need steps and actions. Carol added an important point on cooperation and competition. And I think that's particularly useful because it is one of the algorithms that we need to get our minds around. We've got private sector, public sector. How do we cooperate? How do we compete going forward? Fani talked about the National Treasury and coordination and the coordination role in this. And Chris then spoke about centralization. And I'm going to wrap those two together and say, you know, I'll take Chris's point on centralization one step further. In a period of rapid exponential change and increasing demands, it's not even centralization, not even the lack of centralization. It's actually a move towards decentralization. And that necessitates coordination. Otherwise, it's just a mess. So it does decentralize the ability to pull everything into a center. The center will never be as robust as a decentralized environment. And if you look at what's happening in Africa and in many countries, they're talking about this move from the firm to the market. Now, that's a very powerful idea. How do you decentralize intelligence, yet coordinate that intelligence to be able to do the two pieces, public sector, private sector? One looks at policy, the other looks at strategy. So how do you coordinate strategy and policy, right? And bring that together. But okay, first, so why are payments important? And these are my opinions. And what has caused the shift of payments from the back office where I started, where no one wanted to know what was going on in payments? The less you said, the more the CEO liked you at the time. Now we've moved into an environment where payments has become exceptionally strategic for a number of reasons. And it's become a strategy and a policy focus. So to my mind, payments has evolved and continues to evolve over three very interesting functions. Similar to the evolution of data, which brings us back to the data piece. First is the transportation of value. That's the simple function of payments. Transports value around, it moves stuff around, right? And then you get the complex logistics around that. Payment systems are about success rates. They've got to do it at 100%, otherwise it's not a payment system, right? But on top of that, payments has evolved to become a diagnostic tool. We use it to gauge the health of the country, to gauge the health of, to even gauge social health, to gauge where people are sitting in the economy. BankservAfrica does a whole bunch of very interesting indices looking at payments data, which are publicly available and which give very good economic analyses of where the country is going. And then we get even further to this and we see the third evolution, which I think is where we are at the moment, is that the payment system is actually a lever for societal change as well. It is something that if you get it right and you do it right, it changes society itself. And that's the gist of what I'm going to say next. So, but payments has become attractive from a business sense over the last 2 decades because it aligns to the 4IR so nicely. It's connectivity, it's data, and it's a very practical nexus point between business and 4IR. It's not airy-fairy stuff about sharing data or moving memes around. What you have in payments is you have annuitized movements or movements of data which are uninterrupted, they standardize, and they frequent, and they give you behavioral information which complements and enhances big data. So that's high level. Now, what is it we want from policy formation and the concomitant strategy formation in the market? And I'm going to talk about the market. The payments is inarguably important to banks, right, and the banking industry, not just because of the silo on non-interest revenues and things like this, but because it stitches together deposits, lending, and everything, and because banks are part of a network economy. So I think this call to action, and it is a call to action, is to think big and to think generational change. I was asked by one of my colleagues in BASA once, what is the average age of the payments expert that we deal with? And it was eye-opening to go, well, we're well over 50. Now, so who are we building this thing for, and where will they be, and are they going to be picking up the rails and running the system? So we do need to improve the chances for success for the next generation. And I think looking at that, the focus then is, what are we doing for the country itself, society, the market, the public sector? And there are two objectives that the National Development Plan sets quite well. And I think these are crucial to everything we do here, because if we are going to transform, it can't be a vehicle traveling on the side of the overall objective for South Africa. It has to be something that is complementing the need for this country. So the first is inequality. It is real in South Africa and must be addressed. There's no mincing words about this, right? South Africa is a dual economy country. We have developed world products for one economy, and up to, and Fani might want to correct me, up to 32 million people that do not have sustainable access to these things. This is not sustainable for the country. It is not going to help us move forward, and it reduces the bedrock upon which both economies are sitting on, the excluded economy and the included economy. It is inefficient and impairs investment potential. And this is important because one of the things we have to drive is investment both within South Africa and from outside of South Africa into our markets and our infrastructure. And we are struggling with this. The call to action must be a part of raising the platform, and we must see it as a platform, right? We'll compete and we'll collaborate and we'll do all of that, but we do need to raise the platform and get to a better place. The second thing that the NDP raises is that poverty is around poverty. This is a barrier that most of us in this room don't experience. It consumes the time, capability of families and diminishes their ability to be able to prosper and to be able to elevate the next generation. So the last piece that I'll be bold enough to add to the NDP objectives, and please forgive me, the policymakers and regulators in the room, is a more optimistic look, right? So you get low roads, which are poverty and inequality, and we are on those low roads, but there is a high road path as well. The high road path is many nations are looking at prosperity as the driver, the goal for society. It encompasses wellness, it encompasses health, it encompasses all of these things, but it's about intergenerational change and planning for the future. It's ultimately what we want to work towards, not just for altruistic reasons, but because prosperity also enables value creation, and this in turn increases the strategic and the viability of your strategic business choices. So I'm closing off. The move to digital society it's regarded as a good thing. You know, the United Nations has done the Compact on Digital Society. It's seen as a really, really powerful thing. Many countries have declared that access to connectivity, broadband access, should be declared a basic right of their citizens. And we want to ensure this happens. But if we don't do it on an equitable and for all basis, we will increase the inequality gap, not decrease it. We will put those that have, and people like me who have powerful cell phones and personal Wi-Fi at a much higher level away from those who don't. So before I finish, and it's my duty to say something on cash, because I've spent 2 years now learning about cash and being really humbled by how powerful and how well the cash economy works. It's quite simple. We want to have a digital society, but all must have access. Ola said it very well at the opening of this webinar. Cash is therefore not the enemy. And we will continue to support cash as long as it is needed, responsibly graduating away from cash. So thanks, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Kamaran, for that. I've just posted in the group, in the chat actually, that I'd like the participants that are still with us to think a little bit about what they think should be a priority for the future of payments. I'm mindful that we have 10 minutes. So I'm going to sort of just briefly do one very quick round with everybody again, but I would like the participants to sort of raise some of the issues. And I mean, there's talks of, in the chat, we've had a really nice chat today talking about distributed ledger and the role of, like, you know, communities of practice where there is, you know, better collaboration and that, and also the importance of sort of leveraging systems as well. For me, I think what's important, and I'd like to ask each of our participants, in this process, we have Fani approached the Treasury, and we are going to, and they are keen on the process, but I think they've been, you know, wary, sort of sitting on the outside observing, right? But there is definitely a call to set up some kind of an interdepartmental working group. So I think it comes to Chris's point. You know, when Saul was talking about centralization, in a sense, it's about coordination from the center, but not a centralization of systems in any way. And I think we need to be very mindful that that's definitely not what we're referring to. I think a lot of what we've seen from all of the various countries is there's definitely a move towards decentralization more than anything else. If you look at how data is being shared, sort of the use of API, you know, sort of cloud storage and and just kind of building that kind of infrastructure platform where things like data standards, data governance, how information is shared become far more important in building this sort of infrastructure ecosystem. And I do agree with you. I like the fact that, I mean, this is the encyclopedia, you know, sort of a very abridged version, but I think there is a lot in the space and we could get very lost in it. And I think that's a very important point. And I really love your 3 Cs. So I think, you know, they're very clear. And I think the fact that if government did give a very clear mandate to the private sector, there would be better collaboration and we'd work through it. So just as I've requested, you know, the participants to actually start putting up what they think if we had to set up some type of coordinated working group, what would be a priority for next year from where you're sitting. And I know it's, and I really have done it because you've got to think very quickly. I don't want a very long reply, potentially like a minute on each person. So Carl, starting with you, one priority.
One priority to me would be really to get an agreement on data, what kind of data you need, how you're going to collect it, who's responsible for it, and how you're going to share it. I think that's getting a better end-to-end. And of course, some of the data you already had at your hand, some of it has been collected either via FinMark or any other institutions that have been contributing to this process. But getting agreed on data and its governance would be quite crucial, because that will enable you to put some strategy forward and monitor the progress.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Megan, for your comment. Jason, your one priority?
Thank you, Kathy. I think there's a lot of stakeholders in these discussions. And I think the one priority is really to understand who are all the stakeholders in this ecosystem, understand the value that they potentially can bring. So almost like a mapping of all the stakeholders. Yeah, I think if that's one priority, is in order to achieve coordination and collaboration, you have to get all the people and understand what value, what can they do, and what value can they bring. Thank you.
Great. Fani, I see you have posted in the chat, but your one priority, top priority?
I think my one top priority, it will be a digital identity framework is key and it's quite urgent.
I think I'm with you on that one. Diane, your top priority?
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, everybody. For me, I go back to the data, the data governance, the data sharing, the collaboration around the use of data, for me, has got to be the priority. Thanks so much.
Kamaran?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit different, Kathy. I actually think the priority is to get started. You've got all these battleships that need to happen. You've got all of these strategic things that need to happen. And trying to align all the battleships together to move in a precise, regimented, predictive manner, I don't think is what we need in South Africa. I think we need to get started. The payments journey needs to get started. Kick off this piece. What will happen in digital identity will happen in digital identity, and we will adapt. The captain of that battleship will contact the captain of the payments battleship, and he will say, I have charted a new course, and it will happen. But what we need to do is get started on this, and the key piece we need to get started on, you've said it, is we need a clear central point in government. We need policy to be over regulation and to be over strategy. Once the policy is in place and that is aligned to everything, that battleship can start the engine and start moving. Thanks.
Great. And Chris, last but certainly not least.
Well, maybe. So yes, all of those comments are really useful and powerful. And as usual, the problem now is, but they're all quite different. So which one do we go with? So, I mean, I guess trying to draw that together a bit, prerogative of going last, I would say there are three big packets of work, and your intergovernmental committee wants to, I think, have this as their starting agenda, in Kamaran's goal of getting started. There's definitely a digital identity agenda. We have to be clear to ourselves and to the rest of South Africa about how digital identity is going to work in this country. Until we do that, a whole lot of other things are not going to work, not just government person payments. So yeah, let's get that one on the list, as there'll be an answer there. And it doesn't need to be an answer that is in lockstep with the other problems we've got in front of us, because it touches so many things. It's a piece of foundational architecture for the country. So it needs to be done in that way, right? The second one I would pick, and people have talked about it as the data. I'm actually reading that as the qualifications process for government grants and welfare, right? Because there are a lot of different agencies, they have their own qualifications process, their own databases, and there's a massive coordination challenge there. That's relatively distinct from the payments delivery mechanisms. It's something you can do as a government initiative and coordination exercise across minimising waste, minimising fraud, maximising efficiency in that space. And the World Bank gave us lots of great tips about that. There is really a little playbook there now for that, how to coordinate those databases, keep them clean, keep them smooth. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff that could be done there. I'm not the expert, you know, Fani and others know a lot more about it, but that's a big piece of work that can be done in a relatively parallel, discrete way. And then the third one is the payment delivery mechanism. There are new payment delivery mechanisms coming along. This is more in the central bank's world than anybody else's, I think. We know that RPP is going to be on stream next year. The banks have put a lot of money into that. That should be harnessed. We should be clear how we're going to use that in government as another tool to deliver and to coordinate so that all government agencies can use all payment delivery mechanisms, the lesson we learned during COVID, you know, keep those two things fluid and connected. But beyond RPP, there is a whole agenda of new payment mechanisms we're going to have to grapple with in the next 10 years. There's going to be proliferation of alternatives. So we need a way of sorting through those and prioritising them and say, this one for South Africa now, this one not now, maybe in 4 or 5 years, you know, that kind of process. So there's 3 chunks of work you could put on an agenda and sit down with the committee and go to work on.
Super, thanks so much. And Megan has an interesting comment on the minimum viable product to solve the critical use cases on a foundation that is scalable. And I think that is very important. And I think to your point, Chris, you know, the payments environment is changing at a radical rate, particularly sort of at the SARB. I mean, we haven't even touched on, you know, DCDT. We haven't touched at all on like digital fiat currencies and that. And I think that's certainly going to change.
Stable coins, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, indeed.
Exactly. And I mean, we haven't really touched on that at all, but it certainly changes the environment and the payments landscape largely. And, you know, there were comments earlier on by Suleiman specifically about the use of DCDT, well, digital ledger technology specifically around how data can become a lot more interoperable, especially if you're moving in the direction of sort of self-sovereign identification, and digital identity then becomes a key underpinning driver of how you start to leverage the information that is available, which then means that the infrastructure environment, governments, how data is shared, data standards start to become quite critical in the landscape more broadly. Having said that, I think it is exactly 4 o'clock. I would like to thank every single one of our panelists for your participation specifically today, but more specifically over the entire course of this webinar series. I mean, you have been amazing, all of you. Thank you very much. I mean, we've called on you a few times. Jason, yourself, Chris, Fani, and Di have been here. Carl, you as well. Kumaran, I know you're often sort of behind the scenes, but you're always here helping us unlock stuff and make things happen. So I'm very grateful for what you do. I'd also like to thank our speakers. Megan, thank you for stepping in at the last minute, and sorry for keeping you short. It's a pity we didn't cover some of that stuff because it really is pretty amazing and interesting stuff that is being done with BASA. And I'd also like to thank Eldrid and then Portia specifically on sort of the importance of data, how it's shared, sort of data interoperability and some of the security issues. That said, I'd like to draw a close to our session. This is our last session, so thank you very much for joining us on this. It has been an amazing journey. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned so much. I'm sure we all have. And so big thank you to the World Bank, Julian and Claudia and Shireen. You know, I say exactly what Saul says. You guys have been amazing in supporting us on this journey, unlocking a lot of the speakers. Shireen has worked tirelessly on the back end. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Carla, who, you know, very painstakingly emails everybody to make sure that you get invitations and sorts out the logistics. And then to Marceli, who runs all the tech for us on the back end, who's currently on holiday as well, you know, not just Eldrid, so who's sort of helping us on the back end. So all that support, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And then to the CB PEP and the EU for your support in being able to actually pull this webinar series together in supporting the presidency. A very big thank you. So with that, please travel safely if you are traveling. Have a good holiday, a good rest, and we hope to see you in the new year, and hopefully part of our journey as we start to actually have a call to action to really digitize the future of payments in South Africa. So with that, thank you very much, Miriam. Nice to see you. A big thank you to the EU for this.